Thanks everyone for coming, and welcome to our new high-tech conference room. I'm happy to be joining you via projected hologram today. I know you're all busy, and I'm hoping to minimize the meetings on this effort, but your input is critical as we unroll our plans to educate our folks at the FDA about our country's obligations to the World Trade Organization. I'd like to introduce Ms. Deanne Whitman from the PAO's office.
The Public Affairs Office is in full support of Mr. Jones's effort. We've determined that it's a good time to reintroduce FDA employees to our critical international obligations as we write and implement some important new regulations.
I've invited you all here today because we want to make sure we cover the scientific, legal, and international aspects of our trade obligations. And of course, Deanne, we'll make sure that everyone understands that our regulatory process remains transparent.
You better believe it'll be transparent. That's a fundamental principle of the work of the World Trade Organization.
Absolutely. This group has been tasked to come up with a communications campaign to explain our collective responsibilities here at the FDA, given that the U.S. is a member of the World Trade Organization.
Or as it's generally referred to, the WTO. The United States has rights and obligations under the WTO agreements, as do other member nations. We in legal want to make sure that we all understand that the FDA is obligated to ensure safety first and foremost under the WTO, but we also want to keep trade for safe products flowing while still protecting health.
Excellent point, Randall. The United States is a signatory to an agreement along with 155 member countries that was negotiated to promote free trade and reduce barriers. President Clinton signed the treaty on December 8, 1994, and the United States became a founding member of the WTO on
January 1, 1995. I remember it well. Wow, working on that was a real career highlight. The WTO is the global international organization dealing with the rules of trade.
So we've heard, Randall. So we've heard.
The FDA is one of the U.S. regulatory agencies responsible for ensuring that the United States meets the WTO obligations related to food safety and labeling under the SPS and TBT agreements. The SPS agreement applies to all food safety measures that may directly or indirectly affect trade, and the TBT agreement applies to non-safety issues such as food standards and labeling.
I don't know if all of you know what an SPS, or sanitary and phytosanitary measures for WTO purposes, or what technical barriers to trade, or TBT is. Now, I've done a lot of work on this, and legal is always telling us reg writers to keep these factors in mind. SPS measures are to protect human, animal, and/or plant life and health. Similarly, so-called technical regulations under TBT are measures which lay down product characteristics, production processes, and methods that companies have to meet, including marking and labeling requirements.
Oh, then the thing that we don't want to forget is that the United States has the right to establish our country's food safety and labeling regulations to protect the public. But number one, the measures should be applied only to the extent necessary to protect health. Number two, the measures should be based on scientific evidence or international standards. And number three, the measures should not arbitrarily discriminate between domestic and foreign producers.
I'm delighted to see some of you are already using our new computer presentation system, the Instant Animator, or IA.
It is so much better than PowerPoints.
Sure it is.
IA is a great tool to help everyone understand how important our WTO obligations are in everything we do at the FDA. We have a national interest in keeping to our international obligations to the WTO. We must take into account the trade implications of our agency's rulemaking and regulatory actions.
Hear, hear. And of course, as I always remind all of you, we have to be mindful of the impact of FDA's work on the global community, the country's legal obligation under international treaties, and the impact on domestic and foreign producers.
And don't forget, we have to keep it transparent.
Okay. I see you all have a lot to say, but I think it makes sense to begin with Alicia.
Thanks, Howard. After all, in the WTO, science is the justification for trade barriers, so it makes sense that I go first. Because WTO obligations are really talking about our right to do the core of our scientific work here at the FDA.
And may I add, the provisions of the WTO agreements permit governments to maintain appropriate level of protection for animal, plant, and human health and still maintain international trade.
Exactly. We'll get to all that soon with you, Randall. Alicia, please continue.
The WTO agreement is clear that all measures to protect health must be based on science. We have obligations under the WTO to ensure that the measures are based on an assessment of risks to human health. And in that assessment of risks, we shall, of course, consider all available scientific evidence, relevant production processes and methods, relevant inspections, sampling, and testing methods. Now, here's my favorite part. In order to harmonize measures, WTO members, which means the United States, shall base their measures on international standards, guidelines, and recommendations. But each country has a right to adopt a different and/or higher standard if there is a scientific justification and/or a risk assessment that supports the higher standard.
Wow, Alicia, that was so helpful. I think you really made it clear that science and risk assessment underlies the agreement.
The WTO agreement is about trade, but the regulations that countries adopt must be based on science, science, and science. Great. Okay. Who's up next? Randall, can you please clarify the discrimination issues for us?
Of course. I remember during the WTO talks, we were all focused on ensuring that safety measures not arbitrarily or unjustifiably discriminate between domestic and foreign producers. Late one night, I remember President Clinton turned to me and asked,
Really, Randall? The president?
Okie dokie. Let's see. Non-discrimination. Really important with our international partners in industry wanting to sell products in the U.S. market. As I was saying, our measures can't discriminate because remember, the WTO is all about encouraging free trade. So, measures shall not be applied in a manner which would constitute a disguised restriction on international trade. In order to make sure this happens, we have regulatory controls, such as inspections and sample testing. The measures are applied equitably to domestically produced food as well as to products coming from other countries, and the measures are complete without undue delay and no less favorable manner for import products than for domestic products. To sum up, that's the non-discrimination principle. We test and treat imported products the same way we treat domestic products.
Crystal clear. Thank you, Randall. I think it's the perfect segue to Deanne, and I have a feeling we all know what Deanne's focus is.
Transparency. Now, the reason transparency is so important is that the aim of the WTO agreement is to achieve a greater degree of clarity, predictability, and information about trade policies, rules, and regulations of members. The way WTO members keep things transparent is by using what are called notifications, or notices of proposed regulations similar to our U.S. Federal Register process. Under the SPS agreement, notifications are used to inform other members about new or changed regulations that may significantly affect their trading partners. Transparency under the SPS agreement also includes answering reasonable questions and publishing regulations. It is important for all FDA employees to be aware of the WTO's international free trade requirements and the framework under which our regulations and implementing actions will be evaluated by trading partners for compliance with the WTO regime. This will help us be transparent. Any questions?
Great job, Deanne. Let's see how the IA summarized your presentation for us.
Under the WTO, rules must be based on science. They can't arbitrarily discriminate between domestic and foreign producers. They must be transparent to the international community, and they must be no more trade restrictive than necessary to protect public health.
Thanks for coming, everybody. See you next time.